Thanks so much, everyone, for joining me today. I'm Lauren Malhoit, and I'll be running you through our mostly live demo event today. I do have a few slides that I just want to pop through, especially if you're new to Micetro or even new to the DNS, DHCP, and IPAM solution realm, or DDI as we fondly call it. Like I said, feel free to jump in, ask questions verbally, or use the Q&A panel if you prefer. I will be checking that as well. Plan on just a half hour for this entire webinar. But of course, I'm open and I'll be available to take questions afterward. All right. So it being kind of the end of the year, I did want to spend a little time on trends. I've been doing a little research lately, and according to this third-party report, amongst several others, at least 89% of companies are planning to move to a multi-cloud architecture. And some of these companies will go all public, some will be private, but most everyone is probably going to do a mix of public and private companies, or public and private clouds. But no matter how you might be making your environment more cloud-like for your applications, for the services that you offer to your customers, we know that there are likely migration projects on the horizon, right? Literally everything in IT is a migration project, whether you're doing some sort of hardware refresh, or maybe you're moving to the cloud or away from the cloud, or you're doing an IPv6 migration, right? There's all sorts of things that require kind of thinking ahead and really require you to predict the future somehow, right? Migrations require a lot of decision making, especially when we consider budgets and new solutions. So, I want to talk a little bit about technical debt in the case of decision making and deciding on what solution is the best solution moving forward. If some of you may not have heard the term technical debt before, right? For those who haven't, it's essentially what happens when an IT department is forced to make a decision quickly and then keep using that solution, even though it may no longer be the right solution for what you're trying to achieve. So maybe you've made a decision in 2021 and then you've decided to pivot in 2022 and 2023. And so the solutions you've chosen, you're kind of stuck with because you paid for them. And so you have to keep using them. And it's very difficult to migrate away from those things, right? And in the best of circumstances, right, we are doing the best with the information that we have at the time, right? So, we pick solutions based on cost, of course, and the capabilities which they have, right? We look for solutions that align with the services that we offer to our customers, some of those revenue generating services. We look for solutions that align with the applications that we're offering to our internal customers, right? Our fellow coworkers, our employees, the apps that we're using right now. And then we look for all of that in the context of what can we afford at the time, right? And sometimes this works out really well. Sometimes we can predict the future and we know what's going to happen. But if there's one constant that we know to be true about technology, it's that it's always changing. There's always a new solution on the horizon. Costs and capabilities change. Other competitive solutions become available that may align better with what we're trying to do at the time or at a near future time, right? So now we're kind of all in on the solution that we chose 2 years ago without this present day information. And I want to talk a little bit now about data gravity as well. And some of you may have heard about this term as well. We'll use the example of public cloud to talk about data gravity and what that really means as far as, aligning to technical debt and maybe having some regrets about solutions that we've chosen in the past, right? So if we look at it in the context of public cloud, right, we choose a public cloud to use that, again, aligns with those few things we talked about in the last slide. And we put all of our data in this region or in this public cloud instance, or maybe multiple instances. What happens then once we put our data there? This is where the gravity comes in. Once we put our data there, we then are like, oh, okay, these apps use that data. So let's just go ahead and put our apps there. That makes sense, right? Because the performance will be better. It'll be, from a proximity perspective, it increases performance, it might decrease cost, it might be about compliance, right? There are all sorts of reasons why we start doing it. It might just be easier because, well, we already have this stuff there, we know how to use it, let's put these apps there. Well, then the gravity starts happening, right? It starts pulling in everything else. So these apps use this other data, and now we got to put that data into that public cloud instance. And then there's other apps, right? So you can see the gravity happening. It's pulling everything that we have into this one basket, right? Literally, we're putting all of our eggs in one basket, and that's essentially what data gravity is, right? And so then you can see once we've made decisions, more and more things start going that way. And now, especially if we're in maybe a closed proprietary system, we get locked in, right? That's why we have vendor lock-in. And that's why sometimes this idea of technical debt is very difficult to get away from. So, the question is then, how do we predict the future? We can't. I think that's something that is impossible to do, right? So what's a better question is to end this kind of seemingly endless cycle of technical debt. And that's where Micetro comes in. And that's what I'll be showing you guys today. For those who are not familiar with Micetro, we are a non-authoritative and non-disruptive solution for your entire DDI environment. So DNS, DHCP, and IPAM. So whether you're running your workloads on premises, whether you're running them in the cloud, we can offer you one solution, one GUI, one API, which you can go through as kind of a standardized place to manage your entire DDI environment. And we do that by being an overlay solution. So Micetro is an overlay and orchestration solution. So you have underlying services that are already managing DNS and DHCP for you. Maybe you have some sort of spreadsheet that you're using to manage IPAM. Well, what we can do is import all of your IPAM information into Micetro and then manage your DNS, let's say Azure DNS or AWS Route 53 or Microsoft DNS on premises or Bind or Kia DHCP, right? Microsoft DHCP. You could be using all of those things, right? And we can come on top and manage all of those things for you in a centralized and standardized way. And again, it's very important from a GUI perspective, right? As we think about support teams, junior admins, people trying to learn how to manage this. It's very difficult to manage or have the skill sets to manage, Azure DNS as well as Microsoft DNS or as well as Bind DNS. So anything we can do to centralize and standardize those things is going to reduce learning curves. But then more importantly, right, through the APIs, through the GUI, we bring in standardized, consistent practices. And consistency always leads to reliability. I had an old boss that would always say, what is the most stable time of a network? And the answer is, around the holidays, around Christmas or the holidays in December. And the reason is because we don't touch our networks at that moment, right? And how kind of not great situation if that's what we're doing, if we're just backing away slowly from our network and hopefully nothing goes wrong, right? What we really want to do is bring in abstraction layers, bring in these overlays in order to create a more fungible underlying services, right? In order to not have vendor lock-in, in order to not be reliant on just one service and making sure that everything is just stable and we can't make any changes, and that's the only way our networks will be stable, right? So let's jump into then our actual demo and show you what this looks like. So as I said, Micetro is an overlay, so we can manage all sorts of different services. If I go into the admin tab here, we can see, I can see all my DNS servers, all my DHCP servers. If I want to run any appliances, then I can see that here. By the way, we don't require any appliances. We are a pure software company. So you can deploy us anywhere, like I said, in the cloud, on premises, with very little resources. So as you can see, I have several different kinds of DNS services. Microsoft, I have some cloud DNS services running, same with DHCP. And so we offer the ability to manage all of these services in the same way. If I jump into DNS then, I can see what I'm going to see from a DNS or from an IPAM perspective, right? They look pretty similar. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel. What we want to do is, again, bring in that consistency as you are trying to manage DDI for, either your multi-cloud or your multi-site environments. Over on the left here, you'll see there is a left-hand pane that basically it's built-in filters, built-in commonly used filters. So from a DNS perspective, we see our primary zones right here. So kind of all of our primary zones represented. We have several, as you can see, several hundred in here, but you can have different zone types as well. And so if I wanted to create a new zone, I can just go to create and create that zone here. So we'll just type test. We can pick which server it's going to reside on. And then we can select which secondary servers as well. And then we offer custom properties. So if you want to be able to search based on custom properties, maybe that's by owner, maybe that's by the data center where it lives, or the cloud instance where it lives, all sorts of ways to kind of crack that nut. XDNS zones, I'm going to get into that in just a moment and talk about XDNS, but just to kind of let you know what it is, to kind of tease it a little bit. XDNS is a unique offering from Micetro, which allows you to have multi-service DNS redundancy. What that means to you, right? If there is a single service that folks are relying on, whether that be service offered by AWS or Azure or on premises, or maybe it's a managed DNS service that you're using. If that service were to ever go down, you have no control over when it's going to come back up again. And therefore your sites will be down, right? Your sites will be inaccessible unless someone, magically remembers your IP address. So we do offer a capability that will give you multi-service DNS redundancy. So if you want AWS as well as some on-premises or some managed DNS service, all of those things to be authoritative for one DNS zone, then we can do that through the use of Micetro, and it's very easy. I'll run you through it. We do a lot of Active Directory integration. In fact, we do a lot of Microsoft integration. So whether we're talking about AD integrated zones, whether we're talking about Active Directory users and groups, AD sites and forests, we will allow you to use all of those things because we don't want you to have to reinvent the wheel every time. And I'll talk a little bit more about the Microsoft integration when we talk about connecting to Microsoft servers. I can do things like specify favorites. A lot of keeping track of what we're doing in the DDI realm is about being able to find things and being able to organize them so that I can make informed decisions, so that I can do my planning and have like the visibility that I need, the contextual visibility that I need, and as well as just being able to kind of parse through and find the things that I need quickly. So if I wanted to create, or if I wanted to add another favorite, I can just simply click on a DNS zone here and click the star button, and then it will be in my favorites. And then of course I can unstar it and it will come back out. We have recently viewed. So if I would like to go in and see what was I just looking at, if you're like me, you forget a lot, you will go to the recently viewed and you can then see, okay, so this is basically like popular. This has been what we've been looking at recently. Recently created and recently modified views. Now I love these. These are, if you've ever done some troubleshooting, these are going to be your friend. As I mentioned before, right, the most stable time for a network is around the holidays because it's when people aren't touching the network. When something goes wrong on your network, it's likely because something's changed. Something has been added or deleted or modified, and then something goes wrong because of unforeseen circumstances or because of human error, because of fat fingering. There's all sorts of reasons why something may have gone wrong or not according to plan, at least. If that is the case, then we can simply go to our recently created or recently modified, and we can see which new DNS zones have been changed, deleted, or again, modified. And what's awesome about this as well is that we can go to the view history then for a particular zone and see, okay, well, what time did this happen? Who did it? Maybe why, if there's a comment. So all sorts of answers that we can get immediately. Now, imagine if you were running just, Microsoft DNS or AWS Route 53, right? Imagine what you would have to go through to find this sort of information. I might have to jump onto several servers in the case of an on-premises DNS solution, right? If I'm running 2, 3, 12 different DNS services, and then I have to like log on and look at the system logs for all of those. Doing this in Linux isn't any easier, right? I'm running a bunch of tail commands and literally just reading through command line text. In the case of AWS or Azure, any of the cloud, right? I'm not picking on anyone in particular, but sometimes that's just a black box and I'm not going to get any information. So Micetro puts it all in one place for you. And it doesn't matter, right? Because we did not bolt on the API, we built it in, right? API first. Even if these changes happen via the API, even if these changes happen because you made a change within, like directly to Microsoft DNS or directly to Route 53, right? We're still going to log those things through the API, so you'll still have some information to at least get you started on your detective work, right? As you're troubleshooting. And when you're troubleshooting, I know I've been there, and having, you know, the boss breathing down my neck as I'm trying to figure things out, you know, it's that kind of cold sweat, panicky moment that you have. And so anything that will make that easier, reduce any of the time that it takes to find out what has gone wrong in the network, that's going to be a friend. Of course, we can see different DNS views. You can see that we are separating by Azure External, Azure Demo. You can kind of create these different DNS views. And again, it's all about kind of parsing and finding the right organization that's going to work for you and your organization. If you're using DNSSEC, of course, we can help you manage those things as well. Again, we're going to pull in kind of all of the underlying capabilities that come from whatever service that you're using and make that possible to do them through Micetro, so that, again, you get that centralized and standardized UI and API. And then, of course, you know, if you want to look at your reverse zones, we have that view as well. Jumping into folders. So folders are a great way, again, to kind of organize and parse through. We have static folders, which you can just go ahead and go back to your DNS zones and simply add to a folder by clicking on the meatball menu here, and we can add to a folder that way. And then we have smart folders as well, which are saved filters, basically. So if I were to look for something in particular, let's say Dottie, because I see his name right there. So anything with the owner Dottie, then I can create a smart folder, right? And smart folder owner equals Dottie. And then dynamically, the information will come into that smart folder and tell me, you know, every DNS zone with an owner of Dottie, or tell me maybe all of my external zones or all of my internal zones. You know, there are different ways to do this. If you're a K through 12 school system and you have multiple schools, or you're a retail chain with multiple branch offices, right? We can kind of mix and match the folders and smart folders here, so that we're dynamically pulling in the information that you need. Or if you just want some static information, you know, I work on these DNS zones, I'm going to go here. And the cool thing here as well is that anything in this quick filter will then automatically be populated. So as you can see, I can just put Dottie. I don't have to put owner equals Dottie in order for this to work. And so it automatically gets populated. But you know, the possibilities are endless here too, right? So Dottie is a fairly easy search. But once I start using regex expressions with, you know, multiple layers of and or anything like that, those become much more complicated to remember every time. So it's nice that we can save those filters. We also can parse through by DNS service. So if I want to just see all the DNS zones that are in DC16, that are, you know, authoritative from DC16, then I can go ahead and look that way as well. One thing I want to cover about DNS as well is, let's jump into we'll get rid of my filter here, and then we'll jump into one of these DNS zones and create a new record. So we'll just create a test record. It's an A record with 3600 time to live. And then we'll start putting in an address here. Now you see automatically ranges start popping up. Those are actually scopes. Let's see if we can get a good range here. Okay, ranges will start popping up, right? Which is really helpful. So now this means I don't have to pop back between my IPAM tab and my DNS tab because it's all contextualized. It's all of the information is here in one spot, right? Once I kind of narrow down on the range that I want and click on it, it will then automatically choose the next freely available IP for me. So again, I don't have to kind of pop back in between the ranges that I want to use in the IPAM tab and then remember everything, copy and paste it, right? It's all right here for me. And then you can see it says free. If I were to change that IP address to something else that maybe I don't know is used or don't know is claimed, then I can do that as well. But every time it'll show me this information here immediately. And then the really cool thing that I want to show, kind of the sizzle reel, right, is I can either create now or add to request. And this all comes back to our role-based access control. So right now I'm logged in as an administrator. So I have a create now button that's possible because I have the authority or the access permissions to be able to just create something now. But what I can also do is add to request, as long as I put the owner name, because at Men&Mice we require that. You may not in your environment. So I add to request, and now over in my shopping cart, we can see that I have this DNS request. Now, this means that I can have a level of user that is a requester, and these could be possibly non-network engineers, right? Non-systems engineers. These could be developers or application owners, all sorts of folks within, the larger IT organization that require DNS records, that require IP addresses so that they can create new services. Maybe these are revenue generating services that need to go to market quickly so that we can bring in more revenue, right? Maybe these are services that your employees use. But either way, the faster we can go to market, the more consistently that we do things, the better off we're going to be. And of course, we can do all of this through the APIs as well. So self-service comes into play and just offering that more cloud-like experience for our users, right? It's all about experience these days. We call it the experience economy now, right? In 2022, 2023, it's all about the experience. So imagine, right, I'm just doing one request here, but if I am an application developer or owner, right, I'm probably going to have at least 3 tiers, if not 6 tiers of an application, meaning at least 3 or 6 IP addresses and 3 or 6 DNS names that I'm going to be requesting. And then I'm going to do that for each stage of the life cycle of my application, right? So in development, right, I'm going to request some internal development IP addresses and DNS names. And once I move to test, there's going to be different IP addresses and different DNS names. And then of course, production, different IP addresses, different DNS names. So right there, right, 6 times 3, we have 18 different requests that we're dealing with, possibly by different teams. So being able to do this requester workflow approval is going to save a lot of time and build in a lot of consistency, build in a lot of great processes, because I can require those different custom properties. I can get all of the information that I need in the ticket and be able to fulfill these requests more quickly. So if I click next, I can schedule this request as well if I want. Maybe I need it by a certain date, or maybe I know when the next change management window is and I want to make sure I get this request in by then. I can go ahead and check that box and then click submit. Of course, I could have put a comment in there as well so that I can let them know, here's why I need this, right? Now it pops up with this window because I am an admin, but I'm going to click no just for the sake of this demo. And so now we can see when I click on workflow and I come in as an approver, I can see, oh, Lauren's requested a few different items. I can check the box. I can see any information that I may have put in there. And then I can choose to reject or approve this particular request. So building in these kinds of automated workflows are a fantastic way to build in, again, consistency into your environment. Now I'm noticing time is moving more quickly than I had hoped, so I'm going to jump into the IPAM tab and make sure we get through kind of the whole overview, right? On the IPAM tab, we have a lot of the same filters, right? We can do things like view the nested view or view a flat view by site or boundary. Again, we can create different networks or DHCP scopes. Container in this context is just a container, an organizational container, not like a Kubernetes container. I can import, of course, we could have done this in DNS as well, but basically if you do have a spreadsheet that you're using for your IPAM currently, or maybe multiple spreadsheets that you're using for your IPAM currently, we can go ahead and import that via CSV file, and just, choose that file and then go ahead and go through the process of importing that information. And by the way, any of those that may have, let's say, custom headers, in fact, let's just go through it while we're here, right? Any of those that may have custom headers, no, that might not be a good one. Let's see if we can get one that'll work. Oh, those are DNS zones, that's why. Give me a moment here. Let's try that. Okay, I know which one will work. Give me just a moment. There we go. Okay, so you'll see up here I have the column headers, right? We call these custom properties in Microsoft or in Micetro. If I have more custom properties that I'm using in order to apply any sort of identification information, I can certainly create those custom properties in Micetro and then import the entire spreadsheet as we need it. I won't go through the process just because it takes a few minutes, but it's as simple as that, right? And we can easily find errors using that import. I can, again, going back to the organizational aspect, especially from the context of having DNS, DHCP, and IPAM all in one place, I can kind of separate those by these default filters here. I can see my IP ranges, my DHCP scopes, my organizational containers, favorites, again, the recently viewed, recently created and modified, I love that. And then anything highly utilized. And this is a configurable value. We just don't have anything over 80% right now. But I also have folders and smart folders. So you can, use the highly utilized filter, which is fantastic, or we can get different, we can get more granular with it. Right? So I talked about having kind of a more complicated filter here in the smart folders. So for example, I have all of my /24 ranges with utilization over 50%. Maybe that's important to me. So all sorts of ways we can figure out how to create different filters that might be helpful to us as we do migration projects. Maybe we can create folders according to migration projects. And then of course, we can see all of our services as well. And I mentioned, again, kind of that AD integration all along the way. And by the way, that's on-premises AD as well as Azure AD. And then, we can kind of see our sites built in. We can apply this information so that we can easily then, for example, just view networks in Austria. And then if I wanted to, I could create a smart folder with that information. Okay. We do, of course, offer reporting of all sorts. You can build your own reports. You can save these reports for later use. All sorts of things that you can give to your manager or give to some sort of compliance officer that will help you just produce, here's the information that's happening in kind of a report form. And then, of course, you can use the APIs for more real-time information. If the GUI, isn't sufficient, right? If I want to get a ton of information, maybe in a contextualized way or triggered in some way, maybe create a notification email and all of that good stuff. There are ways that we can do those kinds of notifications. I talked about workflow already. This is that approval workflow that we went through, requesting and approving a DNS, new DNS records. Going back into admin, I do just want to talk a little bit. I'm going to run a minute or two over if you don't mind. I want to talk a little bit more about a Microsoft integration, in that the way that we add DNS servers and DHCP servers is that we use agents, right? It's a very small footprint that we install on your DNS or DHCP server on premises, right? In the case of Microsoft, because we have such a tight integration with them, we actually only require that you install this agent on one server, on one Microsoft server in your domain. As long as it's installed there, then we can use that as a proxy and use that for all of our DNS and DHCP servers in the entire domain. So if you are concerned about kind of maintaining your security posture or maintaining how things are updated and all of that stuff that comes along with agents, we do really minimize the work that has to be done from an agent perspective with Micetro. Lastly, what I want to go over in our 1 or 2 minutes left is what's over here in the admin tab. And the admin tab is actually one of my favorite places because what we really do here is just give you everything that you don't get with the underlying services themselves, right? This is where all of the enhancements really come in. So of course, you get granular role-based access control. You can use Active Directory to enable this, right? You can use the groups and users that you're already keeping track of in Active Directory, and we'll integrate with that. Or you can create Micetro manual users and groups, and it is a pure role-based access control model, meaning you have to apply permissions to roles and then give users and groups assign those roles to users and groups, much like you would in the cloud, right? This is just a more enterprise ready way to do role-based access control. And then we get granular down to the DNS zone, down to the DHCP scope. And if you need to go more granular than that, that's when we start looking at DNS workflow. We will use SNMP to do some of, to retrieve information and validate information, make sure that you have a bulletproof database of IPAM information, as well as DNS information. Licensing, of course, can be managed through the web UI here. We have high availability built in everywhere. So we offer the ability to use your own databases, or you can use an embedded Postgres database that comes along with, say, the free trial of Micetro. But you can use Microsoft SQL or Postgres SQL as well. And then obviously build in high availability from that perspective. And then with Micetro Central, you can build in high availability as we're showing here as well. So the cool thing about Micetro, though, is because we are an overlay, even if Micetro goes down, your underlying DNS and DHCP services will not go down, right? Because we simply orchestrate, right? If Micetro were to go down, everything would continue to run as it has been. And in fact, you could even then directly manipulate those services. The only thing you would be missing is the ability to use Micetro, obviously, to make changes and to get that visibility. But with HA, you don't have to worry about that. With XDNS, you get even more HA, right? And this is what I was talking about between multi-service DNS redundancy. So here you can see it's as simple as creating a profile, right? And so if I have a new profile, I can figure out a conflict strategy and then select multiple DNS services and create this overarching profile. And then once I have created a new profile, I can then go into my DNS and pick a DNS zone, click on the meatball menu, and then simply add to my XDNS profile. Now, the cool thing is it does this pre-flight check. Will these DNS services work for this particular zone? And I can check that with different profiles. And get all of the information I need so that I can have the confidence that my DNS zone, no matter what, even if one of these services goes down, it will remain up because I have 1 or 2 or 3 more services that are also authoritative for that zone. This is something that is possible to do manually, but is riddled with human error if you do it manually, right? So think about if a service does go down, how do we make sure that that stays in sync? How do we make sure that all my DNS records are in all of the places that I've specified? we did some work figuring out how many Fortune 500 companies actually have DNS redundancy, DNS service redundancy. And the answer is only about 9% of them are set up with that, because operationally speaking, it is so difficult to maintain when you are doing these things manually or with your own kind of DIY automation. What Micetro does is it just makes it very simple to configure an XDNS profile, add in multiple services, add your DNS zone to it. And then you can be confident, right? Even in the case of a, let's say a DDoS attack on this other service that you have nothing to do with, your service will remain up. We will work with address spaces. So if you're using multi-tenancy, if you do a lot of mergers and acquisitions, you're bringing in maybe some overlapping IP schemas, then address spaces are for you, and you can manage, again, overlapping IP ranges from the same UI. And then, of course, custom properties, which I talked about a little bit already. So these are the column headers here in every stage of the game, whether we're talking about IP ranges or if we dig in there in DHCP scopes, of course, we have custom properties in these column headers. We have the same thing for DNS. And the thing is, over here, then there are some built-in ones, and then we can also create our own. And again, these are searchable. These are indexed, so they are searchable. So not only through the UI can we make things really easy to find, then we can do some fun things with our APIs and programmatically then use these custom properties. That is all I have for today. I know that was a lot. That is our overview session. We actually did have a few sessions prior to this in the past couple of months that we kind of really dove into DNS, IPAM, DHCP separately. So I encourage you all to check those out for sure. Let me make sure everyone is unmuted in case we have any questions. If not, that's all I have for today. Thanks everyone for joining. And let me encourage you, if you do not have Micetro running yet, we do have a free trial available to anyone and everyone. All you have to do is sign up for it, and you get a 30-day license. And then in order to help you get started with that free trial, we have a full deployment tutorial. They're just all 4 or 5 minute modules that you can watch to get started really easily. Again, whether you're using Windows, whether you're using Linux, whether you are in AWS or Azure, we can help you get started pretty easily there. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining, and I hope you have a wonderful Thursday and hopefully a great weekend, and we'll see you in the next video.